The morning sun burned over the Arizona desert when a little girl came running, tears on her face, her German shepherd by her side. She burst into a bar full of tattooed bikers, shouting just 5 words that silenced the entire room. "They're hurting my mama!" No one moved until one man stood up. What happened next shocked everyone and proved that angels don't always have wings. Sometimes they wear leather. Stay with me till the end. This story will touch your heart and remind you that God still works through ordinary people. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this story to help kindness travel farther than fear. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you and your family always. The sun had just begun to crawl above the Arizona desert, bleeding through a haze of red dust that hung motionless in the air. The landscape was harsh and endless, sand-streaked hills, patches of dry brush, and the long, cracked ribbon of Route 66 cutting straight through it all. Heat shimmered even this early in the morning, clinging to the rusted cars and roadside signs that had long forgotten their colors. Near mile marker 212 stood a small roadside bar, its neon sign flickering weakly in the wind. The Dusty Wheel. It was one of those places where truckers stopped for coffee, locals traded rumors, and men who had been on the road too long came for silence. Inside, the heavy scent of fried eggs, motor oil, and cigarette smoke drifted through the air. A group of bikers filled the back corner, their laughter loud and raw against the dull hum of the ceiling fan. They called themselves the Iron Souls, a motorcycle club known across the Southwest. They looked like trouble to anyone who didn't know better. Rough faces marked by the sun, beards thick and uneven, arms sleeved with faded tattoos that told stories of wars, bars, and heartbreak. Their black leather vests bore the crimson insignia of a skull wreathed in flames. At the center of the group sat Mason Cole, their road captain. He was a man in his late 30s, broad-shouldered and built like someone who'd been working with his hands since he could walk. His beard was trimmed but rough, streaked with the first signs of gray, and his eyes, a sharp steel blue, held the weight of someone who'd seen too much of both war and the road. Before the Iron Souls, he had served 8 years in the Marines. Afghanistan had taken many things from him: friends, peace, sleep. The club was what gave him something to hold on to again, a brotherhood forged not by blood, but by scars. Mason wasn't one to talk much. When he did, his voice carried gravel and quiet authority. Beside him was Tank, aptly named for his sheer size. A mountain of a man in his 40s with a shaved head and arms like tree trunks. Tank had once been a mechanic for long-haul trucks before the open road claimed him. His laughter was deep and contagious, but behind it was a history of a man who drank to forget the family that had left him years ago. Sitting opposite him was Ryder, the youngest of the group, mid-20s, quick with jokes and quicker on his bike. He wore his blonde hair long and tucked behind his ears, a mischievous spark in his eyes. The Iron Souls weren't saints. They'd been in fights, some worse than others, and they weren't afraid of bending the law when necessary. But they had their own code. Never harm the innocent. Never turn away from someone in need. It was a rule Mason enforced like scripture, though few ever asked where it came from. The morning rolled on lazily. The waitress, Marlene, a thin woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a kind smile, refilled mugs of black coffee. Outside, the wind swept across the desert, kicking up whirlwinds of dust. Then, as if the world itself held its breath, the sound of engines quieted. A faint cry cut through the stillness, a high, desperate voice, small but piercing. Heads turned toward the front window. A little girl was running across the dirt lot, her red dress fluttering behind her like a torn flag. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, barefoot except for one muddy boot. Her light brown hair was tangled, matted with dust, and streaks of tears carved clean lines down her cheeks. Her arms pumped hard as she ran, clutching the collar of a large German shepherd that bounded beside her, its golden black coat streaked with sand, ears pointed, eyes alert. The dog, Ranger, looked every bit the soldier's companion, strong, trained, and utterly devoted. His fur rippled with each stride, muscles taut, as if he could sense danger long before any human did. The girl stumbled as she reached the gravel in front of the bar, her knee scraping the ground. But Ranger barked sharply, circling back to nudge her upright with his snout. Together they burst through the open doorway, startling everyone inside. The clatter of silverware stopped. The laughter died. Even the jukebox seemed to pause. "Please," the girl gasped, her voice hoarse and breaking. "Please, someone help my mama. They're hurting her." For a moment, no one moved. The bikers stared at her. The contrast of her tiny, fragile figure against their leather and steel made the moment surreal. The only sound was the faint ticking of the ceiling fan and Ranger's low growl as he stood between the girl and the rest of the room, hackles raised. His eyes, bright amber, scanned the room like he was ready to attack anyone who came too close. Tank frowned, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. "Kid, what are you talking about?" he muttered, but Mason was already on his feet. He crouched down to meet the girl's gaze. "Hey," he said softly, voice steady but deep. "It's okay, you're safe here. What's your name?" "Lily," she whispered, tears trembling on her lashes. "My mama. He's hurting her. Back by the trailers. Please." Mason's jaw tightened. He reached out a steady hand toward Ranger, who hesitated, but then sniffed it, relaxing just enough to let Mason touch Lily's shoulder. "You did the right thing coming here," he said. "We'll help her." He turned to his brothers. "Tank, Ryder, on me." The men didn't ask questions. The air shifted thick with urgency. Chairs scraped against the floor, leather creaked, and the low rumble of engines returned as the 3 bikers strode out into the sun. Lily stood at the doorway, clutching Ranger's fur, watching as Mason swung his leg over his black Harley and kicked it to life. Dust swirled around them as they roared down Route 66, heading toward the line of old trailer homes barely visible in the shimmering heat. The girl remained frozen for a moment, her breath shallow, her heart pounding. Ranger nudged her leg softly, as if reassuring her. One of the older bikers, Buck, a grizzled man with a gray beard and a limp, approached quietly. "Come on, sweetheart," he said gently. "You wait inside. They'll bring your mama back." He led her to a corner booth. Marlene came over, wrapped a soft leather jacket around her small shoulders, and handed her a glass of water. Lily sat there, trembling, staring out the window. Ranger lay at her feet, his head on his paws, but his eyes never left the door. The rumble of engines faded down the highway until it was swallowed by the wind. Outside, the desert fell silent again, only the low hum of power lines and the occasional gust breaking the quiet. The dusty wheel, once full of noise and laughter, now held its breath. Inside, every eye drifted to the little girl in red, and every heart wondered what horrors waited down that lonely stretch of road. Far away, the faint echo of thunder rolled over the desert horizon, as if warning that something dark was stirring beyond the heat and the dust. The engines thundered back to life, roaring against the silence of the desert morning. Heat waves shimmered off the asphalt as Mason Cole leaned into the wind, his jaw set and his eyes locked on the dusty trail ahead. Tank rode beside him, a hulking silhouette with arms tight on the handlebars, while Ryder trailed just behind, his blonde hair whipping wildly in the breeze. The three bikes sliced through the desert air like iron beasts, their exhaust flames catching the morning light. The little girl's voice still echoed in Mason's head. "They're hurting my mama." He'd heard those words before, in another life, spoken by a woman begging for help as smoke rose over the ruins of a village halfway across the world. He had been too late then. He would not be late now. The road narrowed, bending past scattered trailer homes sun-bleached and sagging with age. Rusted mailboxes leaned drunkenly toward the road, surrounded by weeds and broken glass. Somewhere in that cluster of forgotten lives was the girl's mother. Mason slowed his bike, signaling with a hand. The others followed suit, pulling to a crawl. Ranger, the German shepherd, had followed them all the way, his thick coat streaked with red dust, tongue lolling as he panted but never stopped. The dog's loyalty was remarkable. Even as the engines quieted, Ranger's ears perked up, his body tense and alert, nose twitching toward the direction of the wind. "There," Mason muttered, nodding toward a line of trailers half hidden behind a row of dead mesquite trees. Faint shouting drifted through the air, a man's voice, slurred and angry, the kind that reeked of alcohol and bitterness. The bikers exchanged glances. Mason swung his leg off the bike, boots crunching against the gravel. He motioned for silence and moved forward, the others spreading out beside him like they'd done it 100 times before. The closer they got, the clearer the sounds became. Furniture crashing, a woman crying, a harsh laugh that made Mason's skin crawl. He could smell the stale beer even from outside. Inside the trailer, Carla, Lily's mother, stumbled backward into a wall, shielding her face with trembling hands. She was a woman in her early 30s, her once fair skin now marked by bruises that told of months of fear and pain. Her long dark hair hung in tangles around her face, sticking to her skin with sweat and tears. Once, she had been beautiful in that quiet, hard-working way, waitressing at the diner off the highway, saving every dollar she could to give Lily a better life. But her eyes now, wide and glassy, held the look of someone who had forgotten what safety felt like. Her attacker, Rick Dalton, towered over her, a man built from years of anger and liquor. In his 40s, with thick shoulders and a gut that spoke of too many bar fights and too little peace. Rick's face was coarse, his eyes sunken and rimmed with red. His beard was patchy, his hair greasy, and his knuckles cracked from both work and violence. He had been handsome once, but that was buried under years of rage. He had just gotten out of prison 3 weeks ago, and when he found Carla again, he convinced himself she still belonged to him. "Thought you could hide from me?" he snarled, grabbing her wrist and yanking her forward. The glass bottle in his hand sloshed as he raised it. "You and that brat." The sound of boots on the steps made him freeze. The door swung open with a metallic creak, sunlight spilling into the room. 3 figures filled the doorway, Mason in the center, his shadow cutting across the floor. "Let her go," Mason said, voice calm but carrying the weight of command. Rick blinked, confusion giving way to fury. "Who the hell are you?" "Friends," Mason said evenly, stepping forward. "The kind that don't like seeing women get hurt." Rick barked a laugh. "You think you can tell me what to do in my house?" He took a step forward, bottle raised. But before he could swing, a blur of motion shot past Mason's leg. Ranger lunged, teeth bared, and clamped down hard on Rick's wrist. The bottle shattered against the floor, sending shards skittering under the counter. Rick screamed, staggering backward as the dog held firm, growling deep and low. Tank moved fast for a man his size, grabbing Rick's arm and twisting it behind his back, forcing him to his knees. Ryder darted in, kicking the broken glass away and checking on Carla, who was sobbing against the wall. Mason knelt beside her. "You're safe now," he said, his tone softening. "Lily sent us." At the mention of her daughter's name, Carla's shoulders shook harder. "Lily. She got away?" "She's fine," Mason assured her. "She's at the diner with the others." Outside, the wind picked up, stirring the sand into small spirals. A neighbor peeked from behind a trailer curtain, phone pressed to her ear. The faint wail of sirens began to rise in the distance. Rick struggled weakly against Tank's grip, cursing under his breath. Mason leaned in close enough for their eyes to meet. "You ever touch her again?" he said, voice low and deadly calm. "And you'll wish the cops were the ones who found you first." Tank released him just as the police arrived, 2 patrol cars pulling up in a cloud of dust. The officers, one older, one young, stepped out, hands on holsters, unsure what they were walking into. Mason raised his hands. "He attacked her," he said simply, stepping back. The older officer, Deputy Harris, a stocky man with silver hair and a lined face, recognized Mason immediately. They'd crossed paths before, years back, when Mason's club helped after a wildfire. Harris trusted him. "I know you wouldn't lie," the deputy said, nodding toward Rick. "We'll take it from here." As Rick was handcuffed and shoved into the back of the cruiser, he spat blood on the dirt, glaring at Mason. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he slurred. Mason didn't answer. He just turned away, guiding Carla toward his bike. Ranger followed, tail low but ears alert, still watching the trailer until the last moment. The other bikers revved their engines, waiting. The sirens faded as the cruisers drove off in the opposite direction, leaving behind the sharp smell of dust and gasoline. Carla looked up at Mason, her voice trembling. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would come." Mason gave a small nod. "Your daughter made sure we did." He handed her his spare helmet, and when she hesitated, he offered a reassuring smile, a rare thing for him. "Let's get you back to her." As the bikes roared back toward Route 66, the morning sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows that clung to the trailers. Behind them, the desert stretched vast and empty again, as if swallowing the violence whole. But for Mason, the sound of the girl's voice and the sight of her tears had settled deep, a reminder that even in a place as hard and dry as this land, humanity still had a pulse. The desert wind had calmed by the time the iron soles roared back toward the highway, but the heat still clung to the metal of their bikes, wrapping them in a dry, breathless haze. Mason led the way, Carla seated behind him, her trembling hands gripping his jacket as the trailer park shrank into the distance. Ranger followed close, darting alongside the motorcycles with tireless energy, his ears pinned back, his thick coat rippling like a living flame. Behind Mason, Tank and Ryder rode in silence. For a few long minutes, only the engines spoke, a steady, thunderous promise that the worst was over. But Mason's mind didn't rest. He'd seen too many endings like this that didn't stay ended. When they reached the diner near the dusty wheel, the door swung open before Mason even stopped. Lily burst out, her small figure running full speed across the gravel. "Mama!" she cried, her voice breaking on the word. Carla barely had time to step off the bike before her daughter collided into her arms. They clung to each other, shaking and sobbing, the kind of reunion that stripped away everything else. The fear, the noise, the world. Ranger circled them once, tail wagging, then pressed his head against Lily's side, releasing a low, content rumble. Mason stood back, watching in silence. His eyes softened as he saw Lily's small hands reach up to touch the bruises on her mother's face. "We'll be okay," Carla whispered, her voice hoarse. "We're safe now." The others came forward quietly. Tank handed Mason a canteen of water, while Ryder crouched to scratch Ranger behind the ears. "That's one hell of a dog," he muttered. Ranger tilted his head, amber eyes studying him with a soldier's calm before letting out a short bark. Mason turned toward the diner. "Let's get them inside." Inside, the air was cooler, filled with the smell of bacon and coffee. The regulars, truckers, a couple of travelers, and Edna, the diner's owner, fell silent as they entered. Edna was a sturdy woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled tight in a bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She had owned the diner for over 30 years, and her no-nonsense nature hid a soft heart. "Lord have mercy," she murmured, grabbing a clean towel. "What in God's name happened?" "Trouble back by the trailers," Mason replied, guiding Carla to a booth. "It's handled now." Edna didn't ask for details. She simply nodded, wetting the towel and handing it to Carla. "Here, honey, you'll need this." Her voice softened when she looked at Lily. "And you, sweetheart, I've got some pancakes with your name on them." Lily managed a faint smile. She slid into the booth beside her mother while Edna disappeared into the kitchen. The child looked small against the red vinyl seat, her legs dangling, her fingers tangled in Ranger's fur. The dog sat beside the booth like a guardian, eyes constantly scanning the room. Mason leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his gaze distant. Tank sat next to him, removing his gloves with a sigh. "You think that bastard's done?" Mason shook his head. "Men like him don't stop because someone tells them to. But at least the law's on him now." Ryder took a sip of his soda and smirked faintly. Still, that look on his face when Ranger grabbed him, priceless. Mason gave the ghost of a smile. Yeah, the dog did good. At that moment, the bell above the door jingled again. Deputy Harris entered, dust still clinging to his boots. His uniform was faded from years under the sun, his hat tucked beneath his arm. His partner, Officer Blake, followed, a tall young man in his mid-20s with short brown hair and a polite but cautious expression. Blake was new to town, still learning to balance small-town courtesy with the hard edges of police work. "Mason," Harris greeted, his tone respectful. "Mind if we talk a minute?" "Sure," Mason said, stepping outside with him. The air outside had grown heavier, clouds beginning to gather on the horizon. Harris leaned against his cruiser. "Rick Dalton's been booked. Assault, violation of restraining order, the works. But I'll tell you something. He's not the kind to take jail time quietly. You did the right thing, but watch your back. He's mean, and he's got friends who ain't much better." Mason nodded slowly. "Appreciate the warning." Harris gave a firm nod and turned to leave. His young partner Blake lingered for a moment, looking through the diner window at Lily and Carla. "That little girl," he said quietly. "She's got courage. Reminds me of my sister." He hesitated, then added, "You and your crew, you did good today." When they were gone, Mason stood there for a while, staring out across the desert where the first rumble of thunder sounded in the distance. He thought of the countless women and children left behind by violence. People like Carla, who had no one until desperation forced them into the arms of strangers. Inside, the rain finally began, tapping lightly on the windows. Edna brought over steaming plates of food, insisting they eat. Carla's hands trembled as she lifted a fork, but she managed a quiet, thank you. Lily fed Ranger bits of pancake under the table, giggling softly for the first time. Tank glanced out the window. Storm's rolling in. Might want to hole up here for a while. Mason nodded, sitting down across from Carla. You have anyone we can call? Family? She shook her head. No one left. My parents passed years ago. We moved out here to start fresh, but Rick found us. She looked down at her hands. I kept hoping he'd change. Mason's voice was gentle but firm. Men like that don't change, but you can. Carla looked up at him, at the man's weathered face, the lines carved deep around his eyes, the faint scars across his knuckles. There was something steady there, something that spoke of loss, but also resilience. Why did you help us? She asked softly. Mason paused. Because once someone didn't help when they could have, and I promised I wouldn't make that mistake again. For a long moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the sound of rain and Ranger's quiet breathing. Later, as dusk began to fall, the storm moved eastward, leaving behind the smell of wet earth and gasoline. The iron souls gathered by their bikes. Mason turned back to Carla and Lily, who stood under the diner's awning. You two take care tonight, he said. We'll be around. Lily stepped forward, hugging him suddenly. Thank you, mister. He froze for just a second before patting her back awkwardly. You're welcome, kid. Ranger wagged his tail, watching as Mason mounted his bike. With one last look at the mother and daughter, the iron souls rolled out into the damp desert evening, their headlights cutting through the mist like silent promises. Inside the diner, Carla watched until the sound of engines faded, her fingers resting lightly on Lily's shoulder. Maybe, she whispered, there are still good people out there after all. The rain had passed, leaving the desert air washed clean and still. The scent of wet sand mingled with the faint aroma of coffee and gasoline drifting from the diner. Outside, puddles reflected the pale evening sky, broken only by the soft glow of neon lights from the dusty wheel sign flickering weakly in the dusk. The iron souls had returned, their bikes lined neatly under the awning, engines ticking as they cooled. Inside, warmth spread from the smell of fresh brewed coffee and the quiet hum of the jukebox playing a slow country tune. Mason sat at the counter, elbows resting on the scarred wood, eyes distant. The day's chaos was finally behind them, yet the weight of it lingered. Across the room, Lily and Carla sat bundled in worn blankets, steam rising from mugs between their hands. Lily's small body leaned against her mother's side, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Ranger lay stretched across their feet, his thick coat still damp from the rain, his head resting protectively on Lily's leg. His eyes were half closed, but the occasional flick of his ear betrayed his alertness. The silence inside was one of reverence, the kind that follows after fear. The regulars spoke in low voices. A trucker in a faded plaid shirt and a woman in a waitress uniform sat at the far end, whispering softly, their eyes glancing now and then at the mother and child. Behind the counter, Edna poured fresh coffee into Mason's cup without a word. Her silver hair was still slightly frizzy from the humidity, and her lined face softened as she looked toward Lily. Poor thing, she murmured. No child should have to see that. Mason nodded but said nothing. He had no words that would make sense of it, no reassurance that would erase what had been done. Tank and Ryder sat nearby, the former peeling the label from a beer bottle absent-mindedly, the latter scribbling something on a napkin. Perhaps a phone number, perhaps a distraction. The bell over the door jingled, and the sound of boots echoed on the tile. Deputy Harris stepped in again, hat tucked under his arm. His uniform was damp at the shoulders, and fatigue weighed on his movements. "Evening," he greeted, his voice roughened by years of smoke and sand. He approached Mason with a tired nod. "Dalton's being processed at county lockup. Shouldn't see the outside for a while, not after the evidence we found. You did good today." "Did what had to be done," Mason replied. Harris looked over his shoulder toward Carla and Lily. "You plan on staying around?" "Until I know they're safe." The deputy's gaze lingered on Mason for a moment, then softened. "You've got a good heart under all that leather," he said quietly, before heading back toward the door. On his way out, he stopped at Carla's booth. "Ma'am, if you need anything, police escort, safe place, whatever it is, you come straight to me." Carla gave a small, weary smile. "Thank you, Sheriff." After he left, Edna came over with a tray of food, steaming bowls of stew, slices of buttered bread, and a plate of bacon for Ranger. "Eat," she ordered in her usual no-nonsense tone, though her eyes were kind. "You'll need your strength." Lily brightened at the sight of the bacon, breaking off a piece to hand to Ranger, who accepted it gently between his teeth. Carla hesitated before picking up her spoon. Her hands were still shaky, but the warmth of the food steadied her. Mason watched quietly from across the counter, the flicker of light catching in his eyes as if trying to thaw something deep within. As the evening deepened, new customers trickled in, locals stopping by to escape the chill. Among them was Howard Green, a balding man in his 50s with a round face and oil-stained overalls. He owned the auto shop down the road and had known Mason for years. "Heard what happened," Howard said as he joined Mason at the counter. "Word travels fast out here. You all right?" "I'm fine," Mason said. "But the kid and her mom, they've been through hell." Howard sighed. "World's full of monsters hiding in plain sight." He took a sip of coffee, then added, "You think she's got a place to go?" Mason shook his head. "Nowhere. No family left." Howard nodded slowly, glancing toward Carla. "Well, my wife's got a friend who runs the shelter in Winslow. It's small but decent. Maybe she could stay there a while." Mason's gaze softened. "Appreciate it. I'll talk to her." Later, when most of the diners had left, the Iron Souls remained. Tank leaned against the wall outside, smoking quietly, while Ryder tinkered with his bike under the dim yellow light. Inside, Mason approached Carla's table. Lily had fallen asleep, curled beneath Ranger's chin, one small hand gripping the dog's fur. The sight of her innocence amid exhaustion made something twist in Mason's chest. "Howard knows someone who can help," Mason said gently. "A shelter up north. It's not much, but it's safe." Carla looked down at her sleeping daughter, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "Safe sounds like heaven," she whispered. "I don't have much left, but I'll find a way to pay them back." "You don't owe anyone," Mason replied. "Just get back on your feet. That's enough." For the first time that day, Carla met his eyes directly. There was a strength in her gaze now, fragile but real. "You don't even know us, but you risked everything to help. Why?" Mason hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Because someone once did the same for me," he said finally. And I've been trying to live up to that ever since. Outside, lightning flashed faintly on the horizon, the last whisper of the storm that had passed. Mason glanced out the window, his reflection merging with the night. The rain had washed away the dust, revealing a sky scattered with stars. Tank stepped back in, shaking out his jacket. "Road's clear again," he said. "We heading out?" "In a bit," Mason replied. "They'll rest first." Tank nodded, understanding. The last hour of the night drifted by in comfortable quiet. Carla eventually drifted to sleep beside her daughter, and Ranger, ever the sentinel, lifted his head once to look at Mason before resting again. Mason stayed seated at the counter, staring at the faint light creeping back into the world. For once, he didn't feel the weight of the road pressing down on him. There, in that tiny diner in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by leather and scars and the smell of rain-soaked earth, something small and stubborn flickered to life again. Hope. The morning sun returned to the Arizona desert like forgiveness. Gentle, golden, and wide as the horizon itself. A week had passed since that day at the Dusty Wheel, and life in the small town of Holbrook was stirring again. The story of the bikers and the little girl had spread faster than wildfire. Truckers retold it at diners miles away, waitresses whispered it between orders, and locals who had never spoken to the Iron Souls before now looked at them with quiet respect. Even the sheriff's office mentioned it in the weekly bulletin, not in official words, but in the tone of pride that carried farther than law ever could. Mason Cole stood outside the diner early that morning, sipping his coffee. The desert air was cool, the kind that carried the promise of heat later but felt gentle for now. His leather jacket was unzipped, revealing the faded scars across his forearms and the tattoos, one of a compass, another of a name long since covered by a flame. He looked older than his 38 years, though maybe it was the road that aged him more than time. For once, he wasn't thinking about where to ride next. His eyes were on the parking lot, where a little girl in a red dress was trying to teach a German shepherd how to play catch with a stick. Lily laughed every time Ranger dropped the stick too soon or ran in circles instead of straight lines. Her laughter was bright, like something the desert had been waiting to hear for years. Ranger, now clean and shining in the sunlight, barked once in frustration, then pranced proudly when Lily clapped her hands. The dog was in his prime, strong, confident, his fur glowing copper at the edges when the sun hit him. He had become something of a local celebrity himself. People driving by often stopped to pet him or drop off treats. Carla watched from the porch steps, a paper cup of coffee in hand. She looked better now, the bruises on her face fading into pale shadows, her dark hair freshly cut and brushed. The diner's owner, Edna, had insisted on taking her to the small salon 2 towns over. "Every woman deserves to see herself again," Edna had said, and she'd been right. There was color in Carla's cheeks now, and her smile came easier, though her eyes still held the quiet caution of someone rebuilding trust in the world. Mason joined her on the steps. "You two seem to be settling in," he said, nodding toward Lily and Ranger. Carla smiled faintly. "We are. It's strange, having peace. I keep waiting for something to go wrong." Mason glanced at her. "That's normal. Peace always feels strange after pain." Before she could answer, a car pulled up, an old blue Chevy with the logo of Green's Auto Service stenciled on the door. Howard Green, the friendly mechanic, stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. He was dressed in his usual denim overalls, his bald head shining in the light, his round face friendly but serious. "Morning, folks," he called. "Got some news." My wife talked to the shelter in Winslow. They've got a place open, small but cozy. 2 bedrooms, clean sheets, even a fenced yard for that fine dog. Carla stood, eyes wide. You're serious? Howard grinned. Dead serious. Town folks took up a collection. Furniture, food, some clothes. Guess you've made quite an impression. Carla pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling. I don't know what to say. Howard shook his head. Don't say a thing. Just accept it. People remember good deeds around here. And what those boys did. He nodded toward the Iron Soles patch on Mason's jacket. That don't get forgotten easy. Mason gave a small, grateful nod. We'll help them move. By midday, the sun burned high, turning the road into a shimmering ribbon of light. The convoy rolled out, Howard's Chevy leading, followed by 2 trucks from locals bringing supplies, and the Iron Soles motorcycles at the rear. The rumble of their engines echoed across the canyons like a song of redemption. Ranger rode in the back of Howard's truck beside Lily, head high, tongue out, wind whipping through his fur. The little girl waved at every passing car, and a few drivers honked in reply. The house they arrived at sat on the edge of Winslow, painted pale yellow with white shutters and a little front porch. It wasn't fancy, but to Carla and Lily, it looked like heaven itself. Inside smelled of pine and clean linen. The rooms were bright, sunlight spilling through open curtains. Someone had even left a vase of wildflowers on the kitchen counter. Lily darted from room to room, giggling, Ranger following close behind, tail thumping the walls. Carla stood in the living room, one hand over her heart. It's beautiful, she whispered. Tank, standing in the doorway, gave a grin. Not bad for a bunch of misfits in a small town, huh? Edna had come too, wearing her floral apron and carrying a basket of pies. This place needed laughter again, she said, looking at Lily. Now it's got it. That afternoon turned into a small celebration. Neighbors stopped by with more gifts, blankets, canned food, even toys for Lily. Mason leaned against his bike outside, watching from a distance. He never liked attention, but seeing the kindness spread from one act to dozens filled him with a quiet pride he couldn't quite name. Later, as the sky shifted to amber, Lily came running out holding a piece of paper. "Mr. Mason," she called, waving it in the air. Her cheeks were flushed, her fingers stained with crayon. She held out her drawing, a little girl in a red dress, a big dog beside her, and 3 men with tattoos smiling under a golden sun. Above them, she had written in shaky letters, "Thank you, Iron Soles." Mason took the picture carefully, studying it. The colors were messy, the figures uneven, but the meaning was clear as daylight. His throat tightened slightly. He folded it once, gently, and slid it into the inside pocket of his leather vest. "That's going with me wherever I ride," he said quietly. Lily grinned, hugging Ranger around the neck. The dog barked once, as if approving. The wind picked up, warm and sweet, carrying the smell of sage and dust. Carla stepped onto the porch, arms crossed but smiling. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. Mason shook his head. "You already did. You survived. You're raising her right. That's thanks enough." The sun dipped lower, painting everything in gold. The Iron Soles revved their engines, the sound rolling like thunder through the valley. Lily covered her ears, laughing. Ranger barked twice in farewell, tail wagging hard. Mason gave a small wave, his expression unreadable but kind. As the bikes disappeared down the road, the town fell into a peaceful hush. Carla stood beside her daughter on the porch, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Mama, Lily said softly, do you think we'll see them again? Carla looked toward the horizon, where the dust still shimmered in the setting sun. I think, she said, smiling faintly, they'll always be with us somehow. And somewhere down the endless stretch of Route 66, Mason's bike roared against the wind, the folded drawing pressed close to his heart. A reminder that sometimes, even the roughest hands carry the gentlest souls. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come from thunder in the sky or angels in the clouds. They come quietly, in the form of a rough hand that helps someone stand, in the bark of a loyal dog, or in the courage of a child who refuses to give up on love. That morning in the desert wasn't just about bikers and a frightened little girl. It was about the way God works through ordinary people. Through you, through me, through anyone willing to stop, listen, and act. Mason and the Iron Souls weren't perfect men, but that day, they became instruments of grace. They reminded us that no one is too hardened, too lost, or too far gone to do something good. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, is a spark of divine light in a world that can feel dark and unforgiving. Maybe the miracle isn't that God changes the world for us. Maybe it's that He changes us so we can change the world for others. So if this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Share this story with someone who might need a little faith. Leave a comment with a prayer or a thought about what kindness means to you. And if you believe, subscribe and stay with us as we continue to tell stories where hope wins, love survives, and miracles still happen. One heart at a time. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide you to be someone's miracle today.